Forward TV. The world is thinking.
Thank you. A lot of people have asked me all weekend long, am I going to perform musically? I'm not. I don't wish to be unfavorably compared to David Pogue, let alone Josh Bell. So I won't be performing musically, but I'm going to talk about the business of music. Let's get the crass self-promotion out of the way right away. This is my latest record. If you like in-your-face guitars and a guy screaming like he has his nuts caught in a Belgian waffle iron, then you may enjoy it. But this is not totally irrelevant, because every time you release one of these things, I think second only to probably to the movie industry, you have to promote your buns off. You do marathon interviews and people ask you sometimes interesting questions, sometimes really lazy questions like, what was your most memorable moment? Or what are you most proud of? And that only tells you that they never listen to the record and they don't have any idea who you are, what you're doing. They just ask that question to everyone. But a question that gets asked of me often, and hasn't always been asked, but has been asked recently because of more recent events. You predicted everything that's happening in the music industry. What does the future hold for us? And I thought, should I continue to promulgate this myth that I am a prognosticator of some kind? Because in truth, I did not predict what was going to happen in the music industry. I more or less precursed what would happen in the music industry. I've been in it for 40 years, and it's bears some reminding that the music industry is not much more than 100 or so years old. And I thought in order to properly answer such a question, I would have to perhaps refresh myself on the history of the music industry. So I went to the Wikipedias, and this is the sum and total of the history of the music industry. According to Wikipedia, 3 paragraphs. You notice the biggest one is just the last 8 years. I thought that, no, this can't be quite right. But I recalled something, and I went out and I went to YouTube and found it. This, I believe, is probably the seminal moment in the music industry. If you would please play that little video clip we stole.
Hello. Mary had a little lamb. It fleeced as white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. Ha, ha, ha.
Now, the thing that wasn't pointed out in that little piece of video, well, first of all, there's no music involved. But this was the point at which music, which had forever and always been a service, became a product. And this mythology has lasted as long as the recording industry has lasted, until recently. So I'm not going to go through the entire recorded history of music. Okay, we had Frank Sinatra, Elvis, Beatles, Elvis. Did I mention him? Okay. Caruso, whatever. And then, in 1979, Sony came out with this device here called the Walkman. And the distinction is probably blurred in everyone's mind, but previous to that, if you wanted a personalized listening experience, you had to do it in your own home. Possibly you had a cassette recorder that you could do mixtapes on and mess around with the order of songs or take songs from different sources and turn them into one presentation. But previous to that, the music that you wanted to hear rarely left the home. This enabled you to take the music with you, and the music began to adapt to people's lifestyles. Yeah, I'm sure she dressed this way. But in any case, this was part of the promotion for the Sony Walkman in 1979. I never saw this particular yellow one, but it's a pretty hip unit. And I began to deduce things, not at the time, but later, about how this had changed people's music listening habits and how they began to view music, how the impression of what the music industry was or what records were started to change. And this was something that was in control of the audience. Now, a couple of things happened. One of them I mentioned, the Sony Walkman. People started taking the music where they were, so the music became background to their lives, as opposed to them creating a special space to listen to music in. So the music was returning to its original purpose, which was a service. It was doing something for you. You weren't a slave to it. I began to deduce also that music was starting to break down in terms of its originality. In other words, at least in the realm of recorded music or in what music was being bought and traded, that there was recycling starting to happen. And probably the most significant example of that at the time was MC Hammer's Can't Touch This, which was actually a Rick James song recycled. And you probably don't remember. If you're lucky, you don't remember Frankie Goes to Hollywood. And it didn't happen in this country, but in England, they were such a phenomenon with this one song called Relax that every 2 weeks they would release a new mix of it. And that mix would sell and go to the top of the charts. So the recycling of music started to happen. The repurposing of music began to happen. That people were going to use it for different purposes than just listening to. It would be background to other activities in their lives. And so I got this concept, which I called No World Order, and happened to be in the right place at the right time. Because I was into music and because I was also into computers and computer programming, I wound up spending a lot of, as a matter of fact, I moved to California in the mid-'80s so that I could enjoy my two passions, which were music and computers, and began going to all the Macworld conferences and things like that. But I made this deduction at a certain point that it was technically possible for us to create a system that would allow users to completely tailor music to whatever it is they were doing at the time, and even do it in real time, to change it across real time. And so I came up with this concept called No World Order, and I did little demonstrations around the country, and eventually somebody stepped up and said, let's try and realize this. Let's see if it's technically feasible, whether it's a real product of any kind. And that company was Philips. They had a device called a CDI, and they needed new applications. Thought music would be an important one, but how do we make it different than just simply playing a CD? So me and a friend of mine, Dave Levine, one of these geniuses, so antisocial you would never see him at an event like this. But he and I devised a system by which you could, oh, there's a CDI box, by the way. I had somebody actually look at this and say, what is that? That's a Philips CDI box. No, they don't make them. It only lasted about 3 years, I guess, in terms of a format. But anyway, first thing I had to do was make music that would be adaptable to this particular concept. So I changed my ideas of composition and began to write music. While it might still be songs, they had to have discrete entry and exit points everywhere, somewhere musically within it. So broke the music down eventually after I recorded it into 4, 6, 8 bar sections that were all broken down and turned into individual files. Those files were tagged in certain ways as to how many instruments were playing, whether the tempo was fast or slow, various sorts of information. Nothing like what we have nowadays, where things are completely genreified. But the idea was to be able to give people control over the music in a number of vectors. One is that you could choose that thing program at the top. I took that 1,000 or so bunch of musical bits and the tool that I used to assemble them together, and I gave it to 4 other record producers. Don Was, Hal Wilner, Bob Clearmountain, and Jerry Harrison from, he produces records now, but he was in Talking Heads. And they all did their own version, stuck them together in their own way. I didn't show them my version, gave them no idea what it would be like. And they each came up with radically different ideas conceptually. I think one producer, he liked the instrumental bits more than the vocal bits, so it was a substantially instrumental construction. Another guy seemed to try and make songs out of the pieces that I had, even though they weren't actually in literal song form. So the program thing at the top, that's you pick one of those, one of the 5 producers, me and 4 other producers, give me your version of what you think the record is like. Then you can change, essentially, all of the other aspects of it. Excuse me. Direction means that we're not talking about literally playing the sound backwards. We're saying that you've got a verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus. Play it backwards, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse. In other words, it would play the musical sections in whatever direction that you wanted. The form might be play only the verses, or play only the choruses. I like the hook so much, I just want to hear this chorus over and over and over again. Tempo, of course, how fast or slow should the song be? The mood, is it happy? Is it sad? Is it pensive? The mix, can you take some of those instruments out because I can't hear what the vocals are doing? Remove some of those, or remove the vocals. I'm more interested in what the instruments are doing. And then video was just a little screensaver to go along with that. Now, an interesting aside, you see that middle box there? Oh, there we go. For you gearheads in the audience, the essential software construct of this is a continuously variable Gaussian random number generator. Hands up if you know what that is. There you go, okay. A random number generator is kind of like that wheel. The ideal random number generator is like that wheel or like a hat, like that. You got all the numbers that you possibly want in it, and you pick them out one at a time until they're all gone. And so the likelihood of any number coming up is equal to the total number of possibilities divided by 1. Or 1 divided by the total number of possibilities. If you want to have something kind of like less than random, but still kind of random, you apply a Gaussian filter to those numbers. Now, Gaussian means bell-shaped. So what you could do here is, as you notice, I've got the tempo here, and there's one of the, it says fast. And we've got the other tempo. Oop, dear me, I didn't mean to hit that. And right now, it's what these 2 buttons do would roll this barrel of options around. So one of them was the focus in the center, and this would expand or contract the width of that bell shape so that you could contract it until you got the exact same thing every time, or you could expand it until you got that ideal randomness of like never the same thing repeated twice. So this is the way that it doesn't become monotonous. You could contract this down and get exact predictability in the kind of music that you got, or you could expand it all the way and get total randomness in terms of what you got. But again, it's within the constructs that you decide. Stare at this thing for a while I tell you what happened next. We were approached after this by the Time Warner Full Service Network, which doesn't exist anymore. But it was the first experiment, first legitimate full-scale experiment in interactive television. In Orlando, Florida, they found a neighborhood. They put fiber to the curb and high-speed wired into the houses. And each house was supposed to be equipped with an interactive set-top box, and the set-top box was an SGI Indy. Was literally at the time when they were doing it, SGI Indy. It was so big and heavy it nearly crushed half the TVs it sat on. And our mandate was to go out. Well, it was first to design a system. That wasn't hard because we had this previous work. To design a system that would allow people to have on-demand music services in their homes. This was like 1994 or something. So we designed the system. We didn't go to the full programming thing because we had one problem. We didn't have the content to deliver into people's homes. And so the next step was, or the next most important step after proof of concept, was to go to all the record labels and say, would you allow your music to be put on servers so that we can experiment with it to see how much demand there is in this experimental community for on-demand music services. And we went to what was 6, I believe, remaining major record labels and legacy holders at that point. And I think at least half of them wouldn't even take a meeting with us on that basis. And of the ones that did, they were pretty much polite, entertaining the idea and stuff like that, but nobody could wrap their brains around it. There were a couple of problems. One was going to each and every artist who might participate in this and getting some licensing arrangement for what might happen in the future. The other was that they depended on retail. They depended on not just the big, giant stores like Walmart, but every mom and pop store that sold records in any particular manner. They would be so pissed off that they would say, I'm not going to shelve your records anymore. So essentially, we couldn't even get Warner Brothers. This is the Time Warner full-service network. We couldn't even get Warner Brothers to license a single artist to experiment with like on-demand music services. So that never went anywhere. And I recall that it wasn't too long after that I was living in San Francisco, and I would get regular tours of all the big industries around Silicon Valley, and I was on a little tour of SGI because we were supposedly working with the SGI box, and I don't remember if it was Bill Joy or Scott McNeely, but one of them showed me the first internet browser, which was Netscape, of course, but the first time I had seen the internet, which previously was confined to military installations and universities. The public had no idea what that was. And they were just now rolling out, Netscape was rolling out, and people were going to discover what the internet was, the public at large. And one of the first things that happened was obviously inspired by an educational institution probably, but right up the coast here in Santa Cruz, a couple of guys decided that the internet was a great way to break unsigned bands, and that they would put up a site and unsigned bands could post their music, and anybody could download the music, and that was a way for you to get some exposure using the internet. This was an evolution. It was not revolutionary. It was an evolutionary concept. Because previous to that, the belief was that if you did not eventually get a record deal, you were eternally musically unviable until you got signed to a record label. And suddenly here was all of the things that a record label would offer you: expanded audience, etc., opportunities to gig in other places. And actually, IUMA has existed until probably just a year or a year and a half ago. It was bought up by an Italian company, and they tried to keep it going. It just couldn't fail, probably because they were too well-meaning in the first place. There was no money changing hands in this at all. They took contributions to keep the servers up, and it essentially was a public service. Then came Napster. Suddenly, the record industry is having their lunch eaten right in front of them. This was not like 3 years, 4 years since we were sitting there saying, put your music on a server, we'll just find out whether people want to get it from that server. And then suddenly there's Napster. And they're all acting like, oh, what an insult, And so who gets involved in the act now but... Oh, wait a minute, let me go back a little bit. Let me go forward a little bit. There. Who gets involved with the RIAA? Now, Napster, this was a very vague legal area here, so Napster fended them off for a good long time under the model of, people, usually, a lot of arguments. People are downloading music they already have. It's just more convenient, things like that. A lot of this is all because of this. This and things like this. That's iTunes. That's the iTunes logo. iTunes was the first program. I was an Apple guy. It was the first program that I had that allowed me to take my entire CD collection and just shove it into the drawer, one after the other, and have it all automatically captured so that I could download it onto this device. This was my first MP3 player. It's called a Neo jukebox. And for hackers, this is a great thing. If you can find one of these, get one, because you can open it up fairly easily. It's got a regular laptop-sized drive in it. It's a regular old USB device. You plug it in and you can just drop songs into it. None of that digital rights management crap. You just move the songs right into it, organize them into folders, and it'll come up the same way on the little panel up there. But that was about the size of a paperback book, and I carried that around for years, and indeed used it in live performance often as backup. Anyway, along came the iPod eventually, and the genius thing that Steve Jobs managed to accomplish, and I'm not going to tell you all the stories I've heard, but what he managed to accomplish was to get those numbskulls to put their music on a server, on his server, by the way. But he finally talked them into putting music on the server. Now, there's an interesting lexicographic point here we've reached: server service. Music is returning back to its original purpose, which is a service, not a product. To highlight that, if you buy 10 copies of a CD, you have to pay for every single one of them, even though you can only listen to one song on one of those CDs at a time. The CD that you purchased essentially is a license to listen to the music. Not even the industry understands this. That's why they're so fucked up. All right? Anyway, back to the RIAA. What happened then was, when this sort of music swapping thing became huge and everyone got involved in it, what did the RIAA do? Started suing their customers. Is there another industry that sues its own customers? And how long would that industry last once they started doing that? In any case, the record, and I admit the graphics are crappy. I just stole them off the internet, please. But I do these one-off, This is a unique product here, or service, depending on how you look at it. The record industry began to believe, look for all these other ways to make up for what they believe was lost income through file swapping, blah, 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 blah. They never thought, we're just really, we just keep giving people crappy music and charging too much for it. That never occurred to them. And making it harder to get to it, that never occurred to them. But they thought, man, maybe this ringtone thing will save us, They started licensing songs for ringtones. And it didn't take very long for you guys and your kids, from the look of many of you, to realize you'd already paid $1 for the damn song, for the whole song. Not for 15 seconds of the song, for the whole thing. And of course, it wasn't long before somebody figured out a way to take the songs you had already paid for, the CDs you already had ripped, and turn them into ringtones. And so, blah, the record industry is, oh gosh, where did that go? Here's where it's going, and here's why it involves each and every one of you. This I Googled just recently. This is from a little earlier. It's from March. People ask me, where's the music industry going? Blah, 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 how am I going to get my music? My belief is that there's already a model for the music industry. It's the cable television industry. Every single one of you probably has a cable account. Is there anyone here who only watches TV on an antenna anymore? Well, good on you. You need them digital boxes by January or whatever, But once you get a cable account, even if it's just basic cable, nobody keeps track of what you watch anymore. You can watch hundreds of hours of television a month if you have the time. You could go on vacation and watch no television an hour for a month, but you wouldn't cancel your cable bill just because you went on vacation. You would continue to pay it. It's this guaranteed income to the cable television industry. That's why they continue to come up with great programming like, Deadwood and Dexter and, things like that, is because so many people have signed up for cable. Why doesn't the music industry adopt this model? Well, there is that model. There's Rhapsody and there are other things, but people are still buying songs 99 cents a pop. Here's the problem. Music is not like that. Music is never worth exactly 99 cents a song. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of songs that are worthless. And there are hundreds of thousands of songs that are priceless. So if I was to sit those, well, now there's probably 4 of them, 4 major labels, sit them down, I would say, why don't you tell Steve Jobs where to go? Why don't you set up your own servers, get together and figure out a subscription model so that every single one of us can pay $10 a month, not because you tack it onto our internet bill, but because we like music and we're willing to pay $10 a month to listen to anything, anywhere, anytime. Music is a service, it is not a product. The last 110 years or whatever of the music business has been an aberration. And it's time for us all to get over it. Thank you very much.